Let's discuss some details with respect to the unified process because uh, that gives us the bigger picture about the evolution of the software development process models, and I think that is the kind of an integration process model with respect to the two sides what we observed in the previous slides. There are four keywords which are always used to describe the unified process. Those are use case driven, architecture centric, iterative, incremental software development process model. What are the main themes that are described from these four keywords? When we say use case driven, we highlight the importance of the customer view as well as the communication between the customer and the development team. So as you all know, the use cases are used for the presenting the picture about the system, how the user will use the system, and that will be one of the core methodology practice under the unified process. And although it is practiced as a part of the object-oriented model, there is a use case driven is not a part of the object-oriented. It's a general thing. Architecture centric. What does it mean? In the recent development, all the domain experts have identified the importance of the architecture in the system. I mean, that is not a new thing. Even in the other design and development, architecture plays a key role. If the architecture is poor, weak, there is a possibility it will collapse. More possibility. When we say architecture centric, that means whatever the development or addition should be complied with the architecture defined for the system. So it's emphasized the important role of the software architecture, especially in the evolution of the design and development of the project. So then the immediate benefit, the system will become stable. Understandability, reliance to future changes and reuse. So those are the things. The process is iterative and incremental. Now this is what we discussed in the previous slides of this section. The both sides have a good as well as a weak features. There is no guarantee just combining them they will set off. But the good thing is if we combine in a way where you can maximize the benefit from both sides, and at the same time we have to put in a more effort to minimize the bad side. So incremental also has weakness and iterative also have weaknesses. So we will discuss these things in detail in the other slides. What is special about it? Why? Now UP, Unified Process, identifies the best features and characteristics of the conventional software process models and integrate them with the best principles and practices of software development. So the evolution, the best picture is given by the unified because that is in a kind of a model. Sometimes I feel it's in a framework where we can get all the good things and develop. And there are other things. This is not a fix. You can further extend the model. So let's discuss therefore in detail about the unified process. the history or the context. Well, this development goes in the same era where the object-oriented start becoming popular. Kind of a process model which is more suitable for an object-oriented approach. Uh, there looks like the two kids born on the same era, although not directly related. Well, they lived in the same family. That's what my feeling. UML is a kind of a common tool, yes, not only for this one build, but yes, most of the cases being practiced. So provide the necessary technology support for the object-oriented software engineering practice. So most of the time the people use the unified process as the most suitable process model to design and develop the object-oriented things. Just wanted to highlight and show you the UML is not a process framework to guide the project team to apply object-oriented practices. But they goes together, UML and UP. So incremental, we were discussing in detail, but there are some important key features which I would like to highlight because they are being highlighted in the unified process. When you just say incremental, it's not the set of increments that you do it and do it. Very, very important practices are in the incremental development is the scheduling and stacking strategy. You may remember that. So one after another, you don't want it to wait until. So that's very important to minimize the time taken as well as maximize the resource usage. So in which various parts of the systems are developed at different times or at rates at integrated as they are completed. Okay. The scheduling and the stacking strategy is the key thing to make the incremental success. In other words, alternative to incremental model development is to develop the entire system with a big bang increase. I mean advance. So not rather than doing it very hard to think about. That's a kind of a model, but well, sometimes people who have very less knowledge think they can use this big bang approach to get everything is done. I think we live in a world which is not the heaven. On the iterative one, the important key feature is the rework scheduling strategy, in which the time is set aside to revise and improve the parts of the system. So that's the one advantage. If you can remember, you get another opportunity to correct your mistake, to improve address some of the issues. So rework strategy is built into that one. A typical difference is that the output from a one increment is released to the users, whereas the output from the iteration is examined for modification. Okay. In other words, in increment, you test, okay, it's fine, you leave it and you do the next one. So at one stage, you start integrating them all together. But the model is different here, as you can see. Incremental release might include new functions. By contrast, an iteration is more likely to be integrated, examined, tested, with the results be marked as a work in following iteration and all prior to the release. Okay. So it's not a testing separately. You test it once you combine, and then it's much more easier to do something. I think these are some of the good practices and that people follow even in Agile. Okay. So hope now you can answer this question. Why we call unified process hybrid? When I say hybrid, that means it's not only two, more than two. Okay, it's a process model where you try to bring together four things together. So generally there are phases. So four phases usually defined. There are models, unified process models with different sets, but a generic UP model has a four: inception, elaboration, construction, transition. Uh, how many abstract disciplines or workflows? So that is the other thing you see, the minimum. In the some others are maybe more than: business modeling, requirements, analysis and design, implementation, testing, and deployment. So these are the 6 basic tracks that follows in there. Now when I say a waterfall, it creates a picture in your mind. So when I say unified with the two things, phases and disciplines, what comes to the mind? So this is the picture I got from the uh, Wikipedia. So very famous. Hope most of you may have seen this one. Maybe the first time you see this one. But if you look at in this process model, what you can see? Well, you see some phases. Those are the 4 phases on top you see. Then you have the some working tracks. That's what we call disciplines. Okay. They don't, you have to work on them throughout the project sometimes. And it has a lifespan over the several phases. You don't find it a kind of a discipline that start in a one phase and ended with that. Almost all the disciplines or workflows we call sometimes goes across several phases. Okay, so that will be a kind of a strength for people, and also give it an opportunity for people to modify, improve, and continue the development. So these workflows or process areas uh, describe all over the distributed all over the unified phases. That's what I do. Workflow includes several tasks. Okay, so these tasks we will see later. So there may be inside the workflow what the people are doing. So they are identified, defined in the process. So result of the tasks are work products. So when someone doing a particular work, it will result a particular output. Work products we call. Okay. So even if they collect the requirements, there must be a way to document, and the requirement specification will be a could be a work product. Okay. So here is some identified set of work products with respect to the 4 phases. It's not the full list. I mean, in a particular implementation, people may have a different set of work products, but to get an overall understanding and a view, if you are not very much familiar with the unified process, these are the things. Now, if you look at the inception phase, vision document, initial use case model, initial project glossary, business cases, risk assessment, project plan, business model, and one more prototype. So elaboration is the other one. You will see different. So I have listed some of the things which are minimum set of activities or the work products that may result in rational unified process. What is this? This is a kind of an ancestor process model. I mean the beginning, The first unified process model is the rational unified process model. When the UML was drafted, Rational Rose Software Company, they also wanted to come up with a suitable process model by looking at the both these common practices, and people wanted to bring them together. So the later the open source model or unified process, a common model was established. However, before that one, the people developed this model as an initial model, where there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, as you can see, workflows and the 4 things. And phases are what we call the time boxings, divided, but not the first initial inception phase. So many iterations, and they consider the practices like environment, project management, configuration and change management, and when modeling this one, so the additional 3 disciplines, workflows. So would like to discuss a little bit more on we said this is a use case driven. What do we mean by when we say unified process is a use case driven? Use cases are used to capture the functional requirements and to define the contents of the iterations. So in other words, the practice helped the people to incorporate the iterations. Okay. And functional requirements, well, usually people combine several functional requirements to define the one iteration in the traditional incremental model. So the use case is in a tool in that case. Each iteration takes a set of use cases or scenarios from the requirements all the way through implementation, test and deployment, from beginning to the end, in other words. Okay, so this is the benefit all the time. So you see how from the beginning to the end it was designed, developed, tested and deployed. When we say architecture centric, unified process insists the architecture sit at the heart of the project team's effort to shape the system. When I say heart of the project team, what does it mean? I mean, people should not do something that disturbs the heart. Why? It will die. So architecture is the heart. That means whatever the things people want to add, modify, carry out should not disturb the core thing, and should be compatible, in other words, with the core thing. Otherwise it's rejected. Since no single model is sufficient to cover all aspects of a system, unified process supports the multiple architectural models and the views. I'm not going to discuss in detail what are these multiple architectural models and the views, since we have a separate section in our syllabus to discuss in detail about the software architecture, and where we will discuss about the models and the views. So the important thing, the architecture models are usually linked with the views. So the one system, but the view of the architecture depends on the perspective from which you are trying to look at, and that is very important to validate from these different views. Okay, there is no single view. One of the most important deliverables of the process is an executable architecture baseline, which is created during the elaboration phase. The partial implementation of the system serves to validate the architecture and act as the foundation for remaining development. Well, architecture is something that should not be changed during the development, and this is why you need in a development team and a senior person, senior software architect, maybe some of the people may be playing that role where the experience matters a lot for those kind of uh, software engineers, okay, the high level, high ranking people who can, like a specialist, when he sees the symptoms, he knows, okay, this is the case and you need these things. So in the most important thing, so initially they may come up with an architecture, but some modification could be done and people may do some changes, but at a one point, that is where the elaborations, they what they call the baseline, they fix, okay, this is what we are going to use. So once you agreed, signed off, and that's what we call baseline. After that, you have to live with that. It's a marriage. Risk focused. Well, we don't care about until it becomes a threat. So we have to live with the risk. Even these days, so many risks, but until it affects me or you, it is not a critical. Unified process requires the project team to focus on addressing the most critical risks early in the project life cycle. Uh, some people may consider this as a too much. These risks, with that you have to live. But the main reason to consider this risk is to have a mitigation plan. If something goes wrong, what are you going to do? Okay, don't expect a perfect. We know we live in a very uncertain world, of course. Then we have to be ready for that. Not to become panic when something happens. If you have a plan B, yes, you can move. The deliverables of each iteration, especially in the elaboration phase, must be selected in order to ensure that greatest risks are addressed first. Not everything. Okay. If you start thinking all the risks, it become a mental disease. But there are things, if these things happen, that become a disaster. Well, if people start leaving, how are we going to face the project? There must be a plan. There must be some people. There must be a kind of a way to address the things. I think it's in the recent days what I have seen is work from home. It's not a new practice, especially in the software context. So they easily start continuing their work. But in the other working context, it's something you have to do because there is no any other way to address the issue. But there are lots of benefits. If you don't practice that one in the correct way, again, it becomes another overhead. The resource utilization in the project life cycle is not on the same level. As you can see, at the inception, of course, very important, but people put in a limited resources. A construction is where you need more and more resources. So in a project portfolio, where an organization has many projects, if they follow it, this overall distribution is a very useful, where they can change the team and move the team from one to others if they have a proper plan. Inception phase, I also like to say a few more things. The key difference in the inception phase and the other phases, usually no time box. It's a one phase, the beginning. We say you don't have two beginnings. You should have a one beginning. but in a large project this may change. I don't want to say there is a no hard and fast rule saying you can't have uh, kind of in a time box, or you can't have two circles on the beginning. It depends on the project, but surely where they will wanted to have a one start where they put the things documented and get ready to do it. So obviously the smaller space, if longer, than not a good indicator. So that's a kind of the thing should be. Yeah. Goals of inspection phase is established a justification or business case for the project. Okay, that is the main goal of the inspection phase, and the project scope and the boundary conditions. Okay, and usually people don't consider these boundary conditions are very seriously, but they are very, very important to see whether you are within the scope, whether we are outside the scope. Okay, and at least people may not be able to come up clearly define the scope, but good points to define these conditions. Outline the use cases and the key requirements that will derive the design trade-offs. So people do this one. Okay, and kind of in a way of key requirements, high level requirements, sometimes we say. We don't go and we have to document, outline these things, how these things is related. Outline one or more candidate architectures. So when the people start collecting, it obviously this or that, but no decisions are made, but they will try to identify the suitable architectures to proceed. Identify the risk. Yes, as I explained to you earlier. Prepare preliminary project schedule and the cost estimates. That's the most important thing why you need to do it in every project where the inception phase. Okay, negotiate and try to get the bigger part from the client. Okay. Outcomes are obvious, just to remind you, since I hope most of you may have practiced some the unified process, not all. Encompasses the customer communication and planning activities. That is the where you initiate these communications and with the customer, and then plan the overall plan will come up as in a part of the inception phase, and identify the business requirements. Okay, and yeah, you put the business use cases, initial use cases, we call the basic thing, function, features, actors, sequence of actions based for the basis for the project plan, things like that. Initial rough architecture of the systems. Okay, imagination. Okay, an outline of the major subsystems, function, features. Refine to model different views of the system. Plan for a number of incremental and iterations. So that's they may, okay, depending on the scope, they overall estimate, and as well as the other thing, they may come think about like this. On the elaboration phase, that is the second phase, where you redo the some of the things what you do in the first phase, capture as many as the system requirements. Okay, so once then when you come to this phase, you are sure that the project is moving forward, and want to refine them and identify missing things and address the known risk. Identification most of the time is inception. So what is your mitigation plan? What is the things that you placed in order to minimize the damage due to the risk. Establish and validate the system architecture. That's the people start. Okay, very important. And validating the architecture, that's tough assignment in the elaboration phase. It supports the key system functionality. So if it is a something selected architecture, can we address all the things, the key functionalities through this? And that's the first test the people will have to do, not the future. Can you address the things to be done? Exhibit the right behavior with respect to the performance, scalability, and the cost. Deliverable from the elaboration phase is the plan for the customer, plan for the construction phase, the next one. Accurate and credible address the risk factors. Okay, so people will be more in a stable approach, a sustainable approach to face the problems and move the development. Some more things, customer communication and major modeling activities. What do you mean by that? Yeah, I mentioned on the previously what is a modeling, okay, and trying to build. You really need to, because it's not possible to identify all the requirements. When we try to look at all the requirements in the bigger picture, you will see the missing part. That's the benefit that come out in the modeling. So when the customer starts speaking about the requirement, there may be missing things. So when the people come, they see these are the missing things. So refine the initial use cases to establish 5 models. Okay. The 5 models I'll talk about in the architecture part, of, where you get the flow plus 1. Okay. You have to keep on refining the use cases. Make sure that is the starting point. Okay. Hereafter you can't, if you try to go to the modifying them, it will affect the whole project. So always the initial thing may have refined, and the second phase, okay, elaboration phase, is the main objective is to refine them. So finalization will be done most of with the next phase. So use case model, analysis model, design model, implementation model, and deployment model. So these are the 5 models where people may consider. Create executable architecture baseline. Okay, so when the people go to the elaboration, go out from there, this is there, the baseline architecture is done. So it's like a something that you put in writing, like a marriage certificates. You can't say no. Okay, you have to move with that. Justify the validity of the system irrespective of all the functions and the features. So it's not just the document saying just this is what we are going to show. Okay, like a political manifesto. It should be, there should be some reasons, justification why you selected this one. What are the reasons? What some sort of a things, because something that's a part of a professional requirement. Not to say, just to say that we did this because so and so asked us to do so. That's not the professional approach. You need to have a way to justify all the actions that you do. Okay, Some more things about the elaboration phase: the review plan, the scope, risk, delivery dates. Those things has to be specified. If necessary, modify the plan as necessary. That's those activities will be carried out at this place. Then the largest phase, the construction phase, actually building up comes. Construction is the largest phase in the project, and the remainder of the system is built on the foundation laid by the elaboration phase. So it's much more easy. People do not want to worry about. It's a matter of complete the project, building the project, design and development, both in the construction means that system features are implemented in a series of a short time-boxed iterations. So there may be several, but usually you see 4 depending on their. Each iteration results in an executable released of the software. So that's what usually happens in there. The construction phase. In the construction phase, another observation is where the increments that are identified, most of the time they will be linked with the use cases, are monitored throughout the construction phase to be completed, and all increments started in elaboration phases to be completed before they go to the final phase, which is the next phase. Develop the test cases for acceptance test. So that's another important thing to be done in this phase, and the unit test for each increment as and when completed. Integration activities are also very important in this phase. Component assembly and integration testing. Otherwise some functionalities may have problems, so technical things, but important to be completed here. Then we move to the transitional phase, the final winding up phase, where the system is deployed to the target users. That must be completed, and feedback received from the initial releases may result in the further refinements through the several iterations. So if the development is successful, there won't be a big issues in this phase, but it depends on the project. Include the system conversions and the user training. And in this phase, in some cases, I mean, this is not a rule, but people do this beta testing by giving it to the users to get the feedback just before they do the final release, get the user feedback, errors and changes required. Developing supporting materials such as user manual, troubleshooting guidelines, installation procedures is to be done. At the end, release should be a usable product. We have discussed so far about the generic unified process, but there are different implementation when you look at the literature. For example, there are implementation where people discuss about the bringing agile practices to the unified process, and very popular one called the Agile Unified Process from Scott Ambler. So if you search on the web or go through some of the literature, you will find where they further take the unified process model which we discussed, integrating with the agile practices. Basic unified process, it was an earlier one developed by the IBM, as today has become a popular one known as Open Unified Process, and which is available in Eclipse framework, most of the time promoted with that, especially as a free, open, unified process model. Enterprise unified process is kind of one developed by the rational unified process, the initially essential unified process, open unified process, open up is Eclipse framework, and then RUP is the, as I told you earlier, the ancestor unified process model. Oracle also has an OUM. I hope most of you may have know about this one, since there are so many webinars, talks about these things, and so there are more and more different refinements, and I have seen even some software companies have their own software development process models, and then they are kind of an extended version based on the culture and the requirement in the organization. They give their own code name sometimes as a software process development model, which is practicing there, and together with all the documentation, other things. So in this section, one of the key objective that I have is to explain you the landscape of these software process models, starting from the waterfall. Okay, people try to develop phase by phase development, but then people identified another approach, evolutionary approach. Later what happened, both these things people wanted to combine. People came up with different things, and the rational unified process was a proprietary proposal for it later, which was refined as a common thing, unified process. And unified process could be easily expanded to the other things, and the other best practices what we can see could be easily integrated with the unified process. And this is the trend in the software process models. And at the same time, what we can observe, people, the people who involved in the project plays a bigger role than the process model. Just having a reputed process model doesn't give any guarantee the project will be successful. The way how you manage the thing using the process model, it is a vehicle. It is in a kind of in a way the team can work together. However, the success comes with the team. And there are lots of practices, good practices in the other process model. Some people bring those practices here, and they could expand it. If time permits, I will try to discuss about the open unified process, another model where you can learn. Some of you may know. Yes, it's not very popular now. Things are changing, but it is very good academic model. I think everyone should know about it. If you compare, this is an activity that I would like to give. See the relationship, the different unified software development process. So if possible, you can find some more and use the discussion forum to discuss them. Especially the project discipline and workflows vary among the different refinement of the unified process. That's the key thing. Overall framework is the same, but those are the two things may vary. But then there are reasons for that changes, and based on the type of a project they want to target sometimes, and the practices they want to bring into them. Okay, so try to discuss them and see it, and then you get in a better picture about the way. Emphasis placed on the different software artifacts. Agile refinements of the streamlined RUP by simplifying workflows and reducing the number of expected artifacts. Okay. Artifacts or the workflows, the workouts I mean, the artifacts that will produce will be very useful. I mean, the people don't want to think about the things. The templates are available. If they want to write the requirement specification, the template is there. They can just pick up from the process model and they just write them. So then much more easier. They don't miss some of the activities. I mean, it's not an ad hoc. This is the good thing when you adopt a process model, a standard process model, which comes with a documentation set. So let's see the open unified process, then you will see the different set of documentation, but usually people develop those things. Specification of what happens after transition of the phase. RUP after transition to new inception phase, enterprise unified process of transition to the production phase. Okay. This is kind of a thing. It may go, the maintenance may also follow another cycle. Okay, it's not the end. Probably the maintenance people may do in a different way. Re-engineering could also happen. Another small activity I would like, because critical thinking is very important, and most of the facts which I presented is may not be the new things, I hope. You may have heard or you may have learned even in your first courses in software engineering and the other courses, but we need to think critically and try to look at from the analysis point of view. What is this? What is really happening? What will happen in the future? Then it will be easy to understand. Try to compare the unified process and waterfall model. Obviously, we know it's a unidirectional, that's a hybrid model, where in the waterfall phases are equated with the process activities. That's the simplest thing. And phases represent the business activities rather than the technical information. And this is not simply because of hybrid and the way the things are structured. Okay, and the two-dimensional view is much more better. So rather than jumping from phase to another phase, I like to invite all the students to discuss about these things in the discussion forum. Okay, my explanations are source, but there may be lots of other things. You are welcome to even challenge what I present, because I am an academic who see the things, and I think you have a real experience. So I also like to see your experience, try to discuss these things.